Jake Martinez wiped sweat from his face as he crouched behind a broken wall. The hot desert sun of Kepler 442b beat down on the old human research station. Everything was covered in sand and dust. Most of the buildings were half buried after 3 years of desert storms. Jake had been living here alone for 6 months. He was not supposed to be on this planet. The human government had left this place years ago. But Jake was looking for old artifacts and technology. He made a living finding and selling old human equipment to collectors. The sound of alien ships landing made Jake duck lower behind the wall. He watched through a crack as 3 large silver vessels touched down near the main buildings. The ships were sleek and beautiful, not like the heavy human ships Jake was used to seeing. Tall insect-like aliens walked out of the ships. They had long, thin bodies and clear wings that caught the sunlight. Jake knew these were Zephyrians from the Trade Consortium. They were known across the galaxy for being smart traders and scavengers. The leader was taller than the others. His wings were bigger and had blue markings on them. He spoke in clicking sounds to his crew. Jake's old translation device picked up some of the words. "Captain Vexistar, the scans show good technology here," said one of the crew members. This one was different. He had 4 arms and gray skin. Jake recognized him as a Catherian named Grolth. "Good," Captain Vexstar replied. "These humans always leave behind useful equipment, but their construction methods are so wasteful. Look at these buildings, so thick, so heavy. They use 10 times more material than needed." Jake watched the aliens start their work. They moved through the ruins with practiced skill. They had special tools that could cut through metal and detect valuable items buried in the sand. Their equipment was small and efficient, very different from the big, heavy tools humans used. The aliens spent hours examining everything. They loaded their ships with human computers, communication devices, and scientific instruments. Jake saw them take power generators, medical equipment, and even some of the smaller vehicles. But they ignored the shelter systems completely. "What about these habitat modules?" asked one of the younger crew members. Grolth examined a human emergency shelter with 2 of his arms. The shelter was a thick metal box with small windows and heavy doors. Inside, Jake knew there were beds, food storage, air recycling systems, and backup power supplies. "Primitive design," Grolth said with disgust. "Look how thick these walls are. And see all these backup systems? Humans are so paranoid. They build everything like they expect the universe to attack them." Captain Vexstar walked over to look at the shelter. He ran one of his thin fingers along the metal wall. "Terrible energy efficiency. Our emergency pods use half the materials and work twice as well. These humans have no understanding of elegant engineering. Should we take them anyway?" the young crew member asked. "No," Captain Vexstar decided. "Not worth the cargo space. Focus on the valuable technology. Leave these crude shelters behind." Jake felt angry as he listened to the aliens dismiss human engineering. He had lived in these shelters during bad weather. He knew how well they worked. But the aliens only saw waste and inefficiency. As the day went on, Jake noticed something the aliens had missed. His weather monitoring equipment was showing dangerous signs. The air pressure was dropping fast. The wind was getting stronger. These were the signs of a big sandstorm coming. Jake had lived through these storms before. The sandstorms on Kepler 442b were not like storms on Earth. They could last for days and had winds strong enough to strip paint off metal. The sand moved like water and could bury entire buildings. The human shelters were built to survive these storms. The thick walls, backup power, and sealed air systems were not wasteful. They were necessary. But the aliens did not understand this. From his hiding place, Jake could see the alien camp. They had set up their own shelters near their ships. The alien buildings were amazing to look at. They were made of clear materials that bent light in beautiful ways. The walls were thin and seemed to glow from inside. "Perfect climate control with minimum energy use," he heard Captain Vexitar say proudly. "This is how intelligent beings build shelters." The alien shelters were works of art compared to the ugly human buildings. They used advanced force fields to keep out dust and regulate temperature. Solar collectors that were almost invisible provided all the power they needed. Jake checked his weather instruments again. The storm was getting closer. He could see a dark line on the western horizon. Soon the wind would pick up even more. By tomorrow, the storm would hit with full force. Jake made a decision. He stood up and walked toward the alien camp with his hands visible. He did not want them to think he was dangerous. The aliens saw him coming and immediately pointed weapons at him. Jake stopped and raised his hands higher. "I am not armed," Jake called out. "I just want to warn you about the storm." Captain Vextar studied Jake with his large compound eyes. "You are human. This is a declared salvage zone. You should not be here." "I know," Jake said. "But there is a big sandstorm coming. Your shelters will not survive it. The human bunkers are built for these conditions." The aliens looked at each other and made clicking sounds. Some of them seemed to be laughing. "Human," Grolth said. "Your species builds everything like you are scared of shadows. Our shelters can handle any weather on this planet." Jake pointed to the growing darkness on the horizon. "That storm will have winds over 200 miles per hour. The sand will act like liquid concrete. Your thin walls cannot stop it, Captain." Vextar activated a holographic display that showed technical details of their shelters. "Our barriers use electromagnetic fields to repel particles. The walls can adjust their strength based on external conditions. We have complete atmospheric data for this planet." "Your data is wrong," Jake said simply. "These storms are worse than your sensors can detect. The human research station has a bunker 2 kilometers north. It has room for all of you." "We do not need help from humans," Captain Vexistar said with pride. "Especially not from a species that overbuilds everything out of fear and ignorance." Jake looked one more time at the approaching storm, then back at the confident aliens. He knew what was coming, but they would not listen. He turned and began walking back toward the human bunker. "Good luck," he called over his shoulder. Jake reached the human bunker as the wind started to howl across the desert. The building was built into the side of a rocky hill. From the outside, it looked like a simple metal door in the rock. But Jake knew the bunker went deep underground and had walls 3 feet thick. He pressed his hand against a scanner next to the door. The security system recognized him, and the heavy door slid open with a deep, rumbling sound. Jake stepped inside, and the door sealed shut behind him with a solid clang. The inside of the bunker was nothing like the beautiful alien shelters. The walls were plain gray metal. The lights were bright white and cast harsh shadows. Everything looked military and functional. There was no decoration, no art, no attempt to make the place look nice. But Jake knew this bunker could keep him alive when nothing else would. He walked to the control room and started activating the storm protocols. Heavy metal shutters slammed down over all the windows. The air recycling system switched to internal mode. Backup power generators deep underground hummed to life. Through the bunker's communication system, Jake could hear the aliens at their camp. They were still working, loading more human technology into their ships. They seemed completely unconcerned about the approaching storm. Weather conditions remained stable, Captain Vextar reported to his crew. "Continue loading operations." Jake looked at his weather displays. The storm front was now clearly visible as a massive wall of brown sand stretching across the entire western horizon. It towered thousands of feet into the sky and moved toward them like a slow tsunami. The wind outside was already strong enough to knock a person down. Jake's instruments showed gusts reaching 60 miles per hour. But this was nothing compared to what was coming. Jake tried to contact the alien camp on his radio. "This is Jake Martinez at the human bunker. You need to evacuate your camp immediately. The storm will hit in 6 hours. Captain Vextar's voice came through the speaker. "Human, we appreciate your concern, but our shelters are designed for extreme weather. Our engineers studied this planet's climate for months before we arrived." "Your engineers never experienced a storm like this," Jake replied. "These sandstorms can strip the paint off a starship. Your force fields will not stop them." Grolth joined the conversation. "Our electromagnetic barriers have been tested against particle streams moving at incredible speeds. Sand is just tiny rocks. We can handle tiny rocks." Jake tried one more time. The sand does not just blow around, it moves like a river. It will find every crack and weakness in your shelters. Please, there is room in the human bunker for all of you. Thank you for your offer, Captain Vextar said politely. But we must stay with our ships and equipment. We have contracts to fulfill. Jake turned off the radio and shook his head. He had done what he could. The aliens would learn soon enough. Outside, the storm continued to build. The sky turned from blue to yellow to orange as dust filled the air. The twin suns of the Kepler system became dim circles barely visible through the thickening atmosphere. Jake monitored the alien camp through his external cameras. The Zephyrians had finished loading their ships and were now sealed inside their elegant shelters. The buildings glowed softly in the darkening day, their force fields creating beautiful patterns of light as they deflected the increasing wind and sand. For a while, it looked like the aliens might be right. Their shelters seemed to handle the worsening conditions without problems. The force fields kept the sand away from the walls, and the climate control systems maintained perfect temperature inside. Jake's bunker, by comparison, was loud and uncomfortable. The thick walls transmitted every sound from outside. The wind howled like a living thing trying to get in. Sand hit the metal shutters with sounds like machine gun fire. But Jake knew this was only the beginning. By evening, the real storm arrived. The wall of sand hit the research station like a solid thing. The wind jumped from 60 miles per hour to over 100 in minutes. Visibility dropped to zero as millions of tons of sand filled the air. Jake's external cameras went dark one by one as the sand covered them. The noise outside became incredible, a constant roar that seemed to shake the entire planet. Even through the thick bunker walls, Jake could feel the power of the storm. His radio crackled with transmissions from the alien camp. At first, Captain Vextar sounded confident. Storm conditions are severe but manageable, the captain reported. Some minor fluctuations in our barrier systems, but all shelters remain secure. Jake checked his instruments. Wind speed was now 150 miles per hour and still climbing. The sand was no longer just blowing. It was flowing like water, following the ground and filling every low spot. An hour later, the alien transmissions sounded less confident. Experiencing power drain in Dome 3, Grolth reported. Sand. Infiltration is higher than expected. Adjusting electromagnetic field parameters. Jake's bunker shuddered as something large hit it, probably debris picked up by the wind. But the structure held firm. The backup power systems kept all life support running perfectly. The air recyclers worked steadily, keeping the air clean and fresh. Outside, the storm reached its full fury. Jake's instruments showed wind speeds of over 200 miles per hour. The sand was no longer individual particles but a flowing mass that moved like liquid concrete, just as he had warned the aliens. Critical alarm in Dome 2, came Captain Vextar's increasingly worried voice. Electromagnetic barriers are failing. We are seeing structural damage to the outer hull. Jake tried to respond but got only static. The storm was so intense that it blocked radio signals. He was cut off from the outside world, alone in his thick-walled bunker while the planet tried to tear itself apart around him. The human bunker continued its steady operation. Every system had been designed assuming the worst possible conditions. The power generators were rated for twice the load they were carrying. The air recyclers could handle contamination levels far beyond what they were seeing. The structural supports could withstand forces much greater than the storm was producing. This was not because humans were smarter than aliens. It was because humans had learned hard lessons over thousands of years. They had built cities that were destroyed by hurricanes, shelters that collapsed in earthquakes, and ships that sank in storms they thought they could handle. So humans overbuilt everything. They used too much material, too much power, too many backup systems. Other species called it wasteful and paranoid. But it kept humans alive when elegant solutions failed. Emergency situation, came a desperate transmission from Captain Vextar. Multiple hull breaches in all domes. Environmental systems compromised. Require immediate assistance. Jake grabbed his radio and tried to respond, but there was no answer. The alien transmissions had gone silent. Outside, the storm raged on with unbelievable violence. Jake sat in his ugly, overbuilt human bunker and waited for the universe to finish its attempt to kill everything on the surface of Kepler 442b. The thick walls groaned and shook, but they held. The backup systems hummed quietly, ready to take over if the main systems failed. The air recyclers worked steadily, cleaning and cooling the air. Jake made himself some coffee from the bunker's supplies and settled in to wait. He had food and water for 2 weeks. The power would last for a month. The air recyclers could run, for years if needed. The storm could rage all it wanted. The paranoid, wasteful, overbuilt human bunker would keep him alive. The storm raged for 18 hours without stopping. Jake sat in the control room of the human bunker, watching his instruments and listening to the incredible noise outside. The wind never dropped below 200 miles per hour. Sometimes, it reached 250. The sound was unlike anything Jake had ever heard. It was not just wind, it was the planet itself screaming. The sand moved so fast and so thick that it carved new valleys and filled old ones. Rocks the size of cars were picked up and thrown like toys. Through it all, the human bunker held steady. The thick walls absorbed the punishment without cracking. The backup power systems kept everything running smoothly. The air recyclers cleaned out the tiny amounts of dust that managed to find their way inside. Jake tried several times to contact the alien camp, but got only static. The storm blocked all radio signals beyond a few hundred feet. He was completely cut off from the outside world, alone with the storm and his instruments. The bunker's external cameras had all been destroyed or buried in the first few hours. Jake could only guess what was happening outside by watching his weather instruments. The readings were almost unbelievable. Sand moving at speeds that would strip flesh from bone, pressure waves that could crush ordinary buildings. Jake made himself meals from the bunker's food supplies and tried to sleep when he could, but the noise made rest difficult. Even through walls 3 feet thick, the sound of the storm was constant and terrifying. On the second day, the storm finally began to weaken. The wind dropped to 100 miles per hour, then 50, then 20. The roar outside faded to a howl, then to a whisper. Finally, after almost a full day of violence, the storm passed. Jake waited 6 more hours before opening the bunker. Storms on Kepler 442b sometimes had second waves, and he did not want to be caught outside if another wall of sand came through. When he finally activated the door controls, the heavy metal portal slid open to reveal a completely changed world. The landscape outside looked nothing like what Jake remembered. Hills had been carved away and new ones built from blown sand. The old research station was completely buried except for the tops of the tallest buildings. Jake stepped outside wearing his environmental suit and looked around in amazement. The very geography of the area had been reshaped. Familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by smooth dunes and strange rock formations carved by the wind. He activated his suit's beacon and started walking toward where the alien camp had been. What he found there made his stomach turn cold with worry. The elegant alien shelters were completely gone. Not damaged, gone. There was no trace of the beautiful domed buildings that had glowed so confidently just 2 days before. The ground where they had stood was scoured clean and covered with fresh sand. Jake followed a trail of debris scattered by the wind. Pieces of alien technology were buried in the sand or wedged against rocks. The beautiful force field generators were smashed into fragments. The thin walls that had looked so advanced were now just scraps of metal and plastic. He found the alien ships half buried in a new sand dune. The vessels had been built for space travel, not planetary storms. Their hulls were dented and scraped. Sand had been forced into every crack and opening. Jake approached the largest ship and activated his suit's external speakers. "Hello? Can anyone hear me? This is Jake Martinez." A faint tapping sound came from inside the ship. Jake followed the sound to a cargo bay door that had been partially crushed but not completely sealed. Using his emergency tools, he managed to pry the door open enough to squeeze inside. The cargo bay was dark and filled with sand. Emergency lighting cast red shadows on the walls. Jake could hear voices, weak alien voices calling for help. He found the Zephyrian crew huddled in a sealed compartment deep inside the ship. They had managed to get their emergency life support working, but just barely. The air was stale and hot, and the aliens were clearly suffering from dehydration and exhaustion. Captain Vextar was barely conscious. His beautiful clear wings were torn and covered with scratches from wind-blown sand. His large compound eyes were clouded and dim. "Human," he whispered when he saw Jake. "Help us, please." Grolth was in worse condition. The four-armed alien was unconscious, his gray skin pale and dry. His breathing was shallow and quick. Jake could see that without immediate medical attention, the alien would die. The other crew members were in various stages of collapse. They had been without proper air and water for many hours. Their advanced alien physiology was not designed for the kind of punishment the storm had delivered. Jake immediately activated his emergency medical kit and began treating the most serious cases. His suit's medical systems were designed to work with multiple alien species, a necessity for humans working in space. "Your shelters," Captain Vextar managed to say, as Jake gave him water and oxygen. "How did they survive?" "Thick walls," Jake replied simply. "Backup systems." "Over-engineering." Jake spent the next several hours moving the injured aliens to the human bunker. It took multiple trips, carrying one alien at a time through the changed landscape. His environmental suit's power supply was pushed to its limits, but the redundant systems kept working. The bunker's medical bay was equipped for exactly this kind of emergency. Human engineers had learned that in space, you never knew what kind of medical crisis might happen, so they built medical systems that could handle multiple species and multiple types of injuries. As the aliens recovered in the safety of the thick-walled bunker, they began to understand what they had dismissed as primitive waste. Every system had multiple backups. Every backup had its own backup. Nothing was built to just barely work. Everything was built to work even when half of it was destroyed. "This medical equipment," Grolth said weakly as Jake treated his injuries. "It uses 3 times more power than necessary." "Yes," Jake agreed, "but it keeps working even when the main power fails, and the backup power fails, and the emergency power is damaged." Captain Vextar examined the bunker's construction through the medical bay's information terminal. His compound eyes moved rapidly as he read the technical specifications. "These walls are 40 centimeters thick," he said with amazement. "The structural supports are rated for loads 10 times greater than the local geology requires. The power systems could run a facility twice this size." "Murphy's Law," Jake explained as he prepared food for his patients. "If something can go wrong, it will go wrong. So we build everything assuming that lots of things will go wrong at the same time." The aliens spent 3 days recovering in the human bunker. During that time, they studied every system, every component, every design choice. What they found challenged everything they thought they knew about engineering. "Your species builds as if the universe is trying to kill you," Vextar observed. "The universe is trying to kill us," Jake replied. "It tries to kill everyone. We just take it personally." Grolth had recovered enough to walk around the bunker with 2 of his forearms in medical supports. He examined the air recycling system with the fascination of an engineer seeing something completely new. "This system can handle contamination, levels that would never occur naturally," he said. "Why design for conditions that will never happen?" Jake showed him the system's maintenance logs. This same design kept a human colony alive when their planet's atmosphere was poisoned by a volcanic eruption. Another time, it worked for 6 months after a meteor impact filled the air with debris. "We design for conditions that we hope will never happen, but sometimes do." The aliens were beginning to understand that human over-engineering was not waste or paranoia. It was a survival strategy developed over millennia of disasters, wars, and catastrophes. Humans built everything assuming the worst possible scenario, because they had lived through so many worst possible scenarios. On the 3rd day, long-range communications were restored. Captain Vextar was able to contact his company and request a rescue ship. But he made an unusual request. He asked for a ship capable of landing in extreme weather conditions. "Sir," came the reply from space, "the weather reports show clear conditions." "Weather reports can be wrong," Vextar said simply. "Send a ship built for storms." The Zephyrian rescue ship arrived 2 days later. It was not the sleek, efficient vessel that Jake had expected. Instead, it was a heavy, military-style transport with thick armor and multiple backup systems. Captain Vexistar had specifically requested a ship built for dangerous conditions. As the rescue crew worked to extract the damaged salvage equipment from the sand dunes, Jake watched Captain Vexistar study the human bunker one more time. The alien captain had spent 5 days inside the facility and his attitude had completely changed. "This bunker uses enough power to run 3 of our standard shelters," Vexistar said to Jake. "The structural materials could build a small city by our standards. The redundant systems are beyond anything we would consider reasonable. And yet your crew is alive because of it," Jake replied. Captain Vexistar made the clicking sound that Jake had learned was Zephyrian laughter. "Yes. Alive because of wasteful human engineering." Grolth approached them with his 4 arms now fully healed. He carried a data pad containing detailed scans of the bunker's systems. "I have been analyzing your construction methods," he said. To Jake, "Your species builds everything with safety margins that we would consider insane." "How so?" Jake asked. "This bunker's life support can handle 50 people for 6 months, Grolth explained, "but it is designed for only 10 people for 2 weeks. Your power systems could run for 5 years, but you only needed them for 5 days. Your structural supports could hold up a building 10 times this size." Jake nodded. "That is how humans build things. We assume everything will be worse than expected." The young Zephyrian crew member who had survived the storm approached them shyly. "Human Jake," he said in careful English, "why do your people build this way? It seems so expensive." Jake thought for a moment before answering. "Let me tell you about human history. Thousands of years ago, humans built a city near a volcano. They thought the volcano was dead. They were wrong. The city was buried in ash and lava." The young alien listened carefully as Jake continued. "Humans built ships to cross oceans. They made them as light and fast as possible. Many ships sank in storms because they were not strong enough. So humans learned to build ships that could survive the worst storms they could imagine." "But surely your engineers could calculate the exact requirements," the young Zephyrian said. "They tried," Jake replied, "but nature does not follow calculations. Weather is worse than predicted. Equipment fails when it should work. Emergencies happen when you are not prepared. So humans learn to build everything stronger than it needs to be." Captain Vexistar joined the conversation. "The Trade Consortium has studied many species across the galaxy. Most intelligent races develop efficient engineering. They build exactly what they need and no more. It saves materials and energy." "But humans are different," Grolth added. "You build as if you expect disaster." "Because we do," Jake said simply. "Human history is full of disasters. Earthquakes that destroyed cities, floods that wiped out entire regions, wars that lasted for decades, plagues that killed millions. We learned that the universe is dangerous and unpredictable." The aliens were quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Other species we trade with build for normal conditions," Captain Vexistar said slowly. "They design for average weather, typical loads, standard operations. When conditions exceed their parameters, their systems fail. But humans build for conditions that exceed normal parameters," Grolth realized. "You design for the worst case, then add extra margin for safety." Jake smiled. "We have a saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Your people hoped for normal weather and prepared for normal conditions. When the storm came, your preparations were not enough." The rescue operation took most of the day. The Zephyrian crew recovered what they could of their damaged equipment and loaded it onto the military transport. Much of their advanced technology had been destroyed by the sand and wind. As they prepared to leave, Captain Vexistar made an unusual announcement to his crew. "When we return to the Trade Consortium," he said, "we will be filing a special report. We will recommend that all future operations on hostile worlds use human-style construction methods." The younger crew members looked surprised. Using more materials and power went against everything they had been taught about efficient engineering. "Sir," one of them said, "human methods are very wasteful. Our engineers will not approve such designs." Our engineers, Captain Vexitar replied, did not just spend 5 days inside a human bunker while their own efficient shelters were destroyed by a storm. Grolth nodded in agreement. Efficiency means nothing if you are dead. The human bunker kept us alive when our advanced technology failed. As the rescue ship prepared for departure, Captain Vexitar approached Jake with a small device. It was a personal shield generator, one of the most advanced pieces of technology the Zephyrians possessed. This will protect you from environmental hazards, the captain explained. It is very efficient and uses minimal power. Jake accepted the gift gratefully. Thank you, this is very generous. It is the least we can do, Captain Vexitar said. You saved our lives when our own technology could not. Jake examined the shield generator. It was beautiful, small, light, and elegant. The alien technology was far more advanced than anything humans could build. I will probably build a backup power supply for it, Jake said with a smile. Captain, Vexitar made his clicking laugh. Of course you will, and a backup for the backup. And maybe a third backup system, Jake added. Just in case. The aliens found this hilarious, but Jake was serious. Human nature demanded redundancy and safety margins. It was not enough to have one of something if that something was important for survival. As the rescue ship lifted off, Jake stood outside the bunker and watched it disappear into the sky. The landscape around him was still changed from the storm. It would take years for the sand dunes to settle and new landmarks to form. But the human bunker stood unchanged, solid and reliable as always. Its thick walls and redundant systems were ready for the next storm, or the next emergency, or whatever else the universe might throw at this hostile world. Jake went back inside and began preparing for his continued stay on Kepler 442b. He had archaeological work to finish, and now he had new alien technology to study. The shield generator would be useful, but first he needed to understand how it worked and build backup systems for it. Over the following weeks, word began to spread through the galactic community about what had happened at the old human research station. The story of the wasteful human bunker that saved alien lives when their own advanced shelters failed became widely known. Other species began to look at human engineering with new interest. They had always dismissed human construction as primitive and inefficient. But efficiency meant nothing if the equipment did not work when you needed it most. Trade delegations began visiting human worlds to study construction methods. Engineers from advanced civilizations examined human buildings, vehicles, and equipment with new understanding. What they found challenged their basic assumptions about intelligent design. Humans did not build for optimal conditions, they built for survival in the worst possible conditions. Every human structure assumed that multiple things would go wrong at the same time. Jake received visitors regularly at his research station. Scientists and engineers from dozens of species came to study the bunker that had become famous across the galaxy. They measured the walls, analyzed the power systems, and tried to understand human engineering philosophy. Why do you use so much material? They would ask. Because sometimes you need more than you planned for, Jake would answer. Why do you have so many backup systems? Because sometimes the main system and the first backup both fail. Why do you overbuild everything? Because overbuilt is just another way of saying still working when everything else has failed. Slowly, the galaxy began to understand what humans had learned through thousands of years of disasters and survival. There is no such thing as over-engineering when your life depends on it. 6 months after the Great Sandstorm, Jake was no longer alone on Kepler 442b. The old human research station had become a busy place, filled with visitors from across the galaxy. Scientists, engineers, and government officials came to study what they now called survival architecture. The human bunker had become famous throughout known space. News reports called it the shelter that changed galactic engineering. Universities sent students to examine its construction. Military forces studied its design principles for their own facilities. Jake found himself in the strange position of being a teacher. Every day, new groups arrived to learn about human engineering methods. They came from species that had mastered faster-than-light travel, created artificial intelligence, and built cities that floated in space. But they all wanted to understand why humans built things so differently. The key is not efficiency, Jake explained to a group of Andromedan architects. The key is redundancy. Every system must be able to work even when other systems fail. The Andromedans took careful notes. Their own buildings were marvels of crystalline engineering that grew like living things and adjusted automatically to changing conditions. But their structures failed completely if certain key systems were damaged. But this requires so many extra materials, one of the architects said. So much extra power, so much extra space. Yes, Jake agreed, but extra materials are cheaper than being dead. A group of Centauri engineers had been studying the bunker's power systems for weeks. They were amazed by the redundancy they found. The bunker had main power, backup power, emergency power, and even hand-cranked manual systems that could keep life support running. Your main power system alone could run this facility forever, the lead engineer told Jake. Why do you need 3 more power systems? Because, Jake replied. What if the main power fails during an emergency when you cannot get spare parts? What if the backup power is damaged in the same disaster that took out the main power? What if the emergency power runs out of fuel during a long crisis? The Centauri engineer stared at him. You plan for multiple disasters happening at the same time? We plan for everything going wrong at once, Jake confirmed, because sometimes everything does go wrong at once. The most interested visitors were military engineers from the Galactic Defense Force. They had been studying human military architecture and were shocked by what they found. Human military bases are built like fortresses, the chief military engineer told Jake. Your command centers can survive direct hits from orbital bombardment. Your supply depots are buried so deep they could withstand nuclear weapons. Your communication arrays have so many backups that destroying them completely would require attacking dozens of separate locations. That is the idea, Jake said. In war, the enemy tries to destroy your important facilities. So you build them to survive everything the enemy can throw at them. But the cost, another military engineer protested. Human military construction costs 5 times more than standard galactic methods. Jake thought about human history, the wars, the destruction, the cities that had been completely destroyed by enemy action. How much does it cost to lose a war because your command center was destroyed in the first attack? The military engineers had no answer for that. Captain Vextar returned to Kepler 442b as part of an official trade consortium investigation. He brought with him a team of the galaxy's best engineers, tasked with understanding how human construction methods could be applied to civilian infrastructure. The consortium has authorized a complete revision of our construction standards, he told Jake. We are implementing what we call human-style redundancy in all critical facilities. Jake was curious about how this was working out. Are your people accepting the changes? Vextar made his clicking laugh. Not easily. Our engineers complain constantly about the waste of materials and power. They say human methods are primitive and inefficient. But they build them anyway? They build them anyway, Vextar confirmed. Because the consortium board of directors spent 5 days in a human bunker during a sandstorm. They understand now that efficiency means nothing if you are dead. Grolth had become something of an expert on human engineering philosophy. He had written several papers that were widely read across the galaxy. His most famous work was titled, Why Humans Overbuild Everything, a Survival Strategy for Hostile Universe. I have been studying human history, Grolth told Jake during one of his visits. Your species has survived disasters that would have destroyed other civilizations completely. Ice ages, asteroid impacts, global wars, plagues. Humans just keep rebuilding and surviving. We are stubborn that way, Jake agreed. It is not stubbornness, Grolth said seriously. It is adaptability. When your environment tries to kill you regularly, you learn to build things that can survive anything. The most significant change came from the Galactic Engineering Council. This was the organization that set construction standards for space stations, colony ships, and other critical infrastructure used by multiple species. A delegation from the council spent 2 months on Kepler 442b, studying not just the bunker but the entire abandoned human research station. They examined every building, every system, every piece of equipment that had survived the storm. "We are implementing new human standard construction requirements," the delegation leader announced. "All critical infrastructure must now include human-level redundancy and safety margins." This caused major controversy across the galaxy. Many species complained that the new standards were wasteful and unnecessary. Construction costs would increase dramatically. Projects would take longer to complete, but the new standards had support from an unexpected source: insurance companies. Human-built facilities have the lowest failure rates in the galaxy, an insurance executive explained to Jake. They cost more to build, but they almost never need to be rebuilt due to disasters. From our perspective, human construction methods save money in the long run. As word spread about the new construction standards, Jake began receiving visitors who were not engineers or scientists. Survivors of disasters came to see the bunker that had started a revolution in galactic engineering. A family of Rigelian colonists had survived an asteroid impact because their settlement was built using human construction methods. The thick walls and redundant life support systems had kept them alive until rescue arrived. "Our colony administrator insisted on human-style construction," the family patriarch told Jake. "Everyone complained about the cost. But when the asteroid hit, our buildings were the only ones that did not collapse." A group of space miners had been saved when their station's human-designed emergency systems worked perfectly during a reactor accident. The multiple backup systems had contained the disaster and kept everyone alive. "We always made jokes about human over-engineering," one of the miners said. "We called it human paranoia, but that paranoia saved our lives." Jake found these stories both gratifying and sad. Gratifying because human engineering was finally being recognized as valuable. Sad because it had taken disasters and deaths for other species to understand what humans had learned through their own disasters and deaths. One day, a delegation of young engineers from the Galactic Engineering Academy asked Jake a question that made him think deeply. "Why do humans assume the worst will happen?" a young Altarian engineer asked. "Most intelligent species develop optimistic engineering. They build for success, not failure." Jake considered the question carefully. "I think it is because humans evolved on a dangerous world. Earth has earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, droughts, ice ages, and volcanic eruptions. Humans who did not prepare for disasters did not survive to pass on their genes." "But surely modern humans are beyond such primitive thinking," another student said. Jake smiled and gestured toward the bunker around them. "This bunker was built by modern humans using the most advanced technology available. But the thinking behind it is thousands of years old. Prepare for the worst, because the worst will probably happen eventually." The students spent weeks studying human psychology and history. What they found was a species that had been shaped by constant exposure to natural disasters and human conflicts. Humans expected things to go wrong because, in human experience, things often did go wrong. Other species evolved on more stable worlds. One student concluded in her report. They developed optimistic engineering because their environments were predictable. Humans developed pessimistic engineering because their environment was constantly trying to kill them. This insight led to a new field of study called environmental psychology in engineering. Researchers began examining how different planetary environments influenced the engineering philosophy of the species that evolved there. Species from stable worlds built efficient structures that worked perfectly under normal conditions. Species from dangerous worlds built robust structures that could survive abnormal conditions. Humans, coming from one of the most dangerous worlds known, built structures that could survive almost anything. As his time on Kepler 442b came to an end, Jake reflected on everything that had happened. A simple sandstorm had changed how an entire galaxy thought about construction and engineering.